Thank you so much for that introduction. And it's such a pleasure to join you virtually. But of course, I am extremely excited to be able to see everybody in person soon, very soon, tomorrow. So as was mentioned, my home department is the Department of Neurology, and a really important, and in my clinical department, I do also serve as our vice chair for diversity and inclusion. As a faculty member, my research, my clinical duties are within adult neuro-oncology, and I do continue to have a clinical trial portfolio and active in my research arena there. But a very important role that I want to speak to you about today and kind of go through the history, the background of, is my new role as Associate Dean for Diversity in Medical Education. And that is a role that I began in 2020. So about 2 years in, but I'll give you a little bit more about the history and the background and the scope of that work today. And I really wanted to take a bird's eye view first to share the goals and the mission statement of our Office of Diversity in Medical Education. And this is an important kind of overview slide because we really want to center diversity in everything that we do here at Stanford, within clinical excellence, innovation, scholarship and research, wellness, career development, and education. And I think having that perspective and centering that mission of diversity as something that is central to everything that we do is the important approach that we've taken, and also allows us to be kind of that guiding light of how we want to utilize our time, our resources, and also our personnel to focus in on. So our mission statement is to cultivate and sustain an environment that fosters the development of diverse physician leaders who are committed to eliminating the nation's health inequities through patient care, education, research, and advocacy. And this work really began from the history of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the medical school in 1969. So this is not new. This is ongoing evolution of really remarkable efforts and a lifetime of efforts at Stanford for many individuals. And it was really Fernando Mendoza who became the School of Medicine's first assistant dean for minority programs back in 1983. Then went on to obtain grant funding through HRSA, the Health Resources and Services Administration. And that federal funding provided the resources for the Center of Excellence for Diversity in Medical Education. And it is that background and history of funding for nearly 30 consecutive years that continues to be a source of strength, and also a historical backing of finances and programmatic support for our School of Medicine's programs, which continues today. In 2009, we launched the Stanford Medicine Diversity Cabinet, and really that was the main intent was to unify diversity offices across the university and School of Medicine and bring together programmatic leaders that are focused on advancing diversity so that we could learn together, collaborate together, and importantly, not work in separate silos from each other and really support each other instead in our mission to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. The experience of wanting to expand our pipeline programs or pathway programs, both from high school, community colleges, undergrad programs, to then really foster that pathway to future faculty in academic medicine began in 2010 with the launch of a clinical opportunity for residency experience, the SCORE program, which is our visiting sub-I clerkship, and then expanded further to support residents and trainees across clinical departments at Stanford. And really it began in 2017 and has been an important background for the intent and purpose of ODME, our Office of Diversity in Medical Education, which officially launched in 2020 as that continuity of pathway programs in the pre-health, pre-med arena in high school, undergrad, and then all the way through to pre-faculty. And I would be remiss if I did not first give an important celebration of how much effort this takes by so many individuals in our office. And our Office of Diversity in Medical Education is composed of both full-time staff members as well as faculty members across different clinical departments that are in leadership roles for advancing individual programs and individual aspects of what we do at the medical school. So I will go through some of our programs in particular and how we achieve the goal and the mission that I stated earlier. Our focus is really within academic medicine to engage our community, both through recruitment, mentorship, retention, and then on moving forward into leadership and career development, and ultimately within curriculum development. And I'll mention a few of the specific examples within each of these categories. First, within recruitment, mentorship, and retention, we have this ongoing continuity from beginning in high school to support students from underrepresented backgrounds to come to Stanford Medicine, see themselves as future members of our Stanford medical community and learn from and by our faculty and our medical students. So we have high school programs. Once students are further along in their education into the pre-health kind of college time period, we have a SUMA conference, which is the Stanford University Minority Medical Alliance. Really, it is all of our student leaders from our affinity groups that lead conference workshops. We have an exhibitor fair. This was back in 2020, the last time we were in person. The last 2 years, we have had virtual conferences, which has allowed us to actually have a much broader national audience too, but we're excited to come back in person so that we can see each other and support each other on our campus. We have a first generation mentorship program that's really for our medical students to engage directly with our faculty at Stanford. And then, as I mentioned, we have undergrad pre-med programs too during the summertime. Our Stanford University Minority Medical Alliance groups are 7, as you can see here, now very recently expanded to 8. And as you can see, they span across different race, gender identities, disabilities, sexual orientation, and religious affiliation. And of course, this is a large group of our students, medical students, and we want to build that community while students are here doing their medical training, and we help to sponsor their attendance at conferences such as LMSA, and also for events throughout their school, throughout the academic year for community building too. Our Leadership in Health Disparities program is a pre-medical school program. So for our first year medical students, that summer before they they begin their formal academic training as medical students, we bring together students. These last 2 years have been virtual, but we, again, look forward to coming back in person. And it's typically a residential experience for students to come to our campus a bit earlier than they would have otherwise, and engage in clinical skills development, leadership training, and research as well to advance health equity. We also want to sponsor and elevate the important work that our medical students do while here, and because of that, we now also sponsor an award to really recognize students who have gone above and beyond with their passion and commitment to advance health equity through research and community engagement. And Eric Jenkins is a third-year medical student now, who was our awardee last year. I mentioned our SUMA conference. So this year we engaged over 1,300 pre-medical students, and this was held back in February, and each year we hold this in February typically on campus. And now I want to shift gears to share a bit about our curriculum development efforts, and specifically go over some of the things that we're really proud of, our accomplishments over the last year. Our Social Justice and Health Equity Committee began the year in 2021, really focusing on the establishment of specific learning objectives and integrating that content into the pre-clerkship curriculum. We want to both build space and capacity, obviously, alongside the existing curriculum learning objectives. We wanted to infuse and incorporate and really place a significant value towards the learning objectives unique to social determinants of health, addressing how to address health disparities, and also systemic and structural racism within healthcare. We engaged students, faculty, and our community because we really thought that this was both important to hear the voice of students who are actively going through the curriculum or who had recently gone through the pre-clerkship years, and also engage faculty to increase their awareness and knowledge of health equity and social justice for effective teaching, and importantly, build that inclusive community to make sure that we elevate this work and to develop future leaders within this space. Another example of a curriculum effort is a medical Spanish course that we developed as a new elective for both our MD and Master's in Science Physician's Assistant Program students with medical Spanish curriculum, and then specific language workshops within the various different subspecialties. Another program that we host is also the LEAD program, and this is for residents and fellows. We bring together across clinical departments approximately 75 residents and another 30 faculty mentors to serve as mentors. And this has become such an important way that we've been able to build our community for URM trainees across the clinical departments, and also focus on that pre-faculty development as well. And just to end or to conclude my remarks, I wanted to share a bit about the new initiatives that we are now working towards within racial equity to advance a community of health. So we're calling this the REACH initiative. And we have 6 prongs to this, including a new post-bac program that is being launched this summer, actually, as the first inaugural year for pre-medical students. We're also forming a new MD-MS combined program for our medical students here at Stanford to engage specifically in health equity research. a new scholarly concentration. So this is a mandatory aspect of all MD students. They have the opportunity to select a scholarly concentration. So we're building a new scholarly concentration that is focused on health equity and social justice. There will also be a new clinical clerkship in community health of the underserved. So this will be a really transformational aspect of the curriculum, in that now all graduating medical students from Stanford will engage in a focused clinical clerkship as part of their third and fourth year medical school training within the community. We also have a new Reach Bioscience PhD fellowship and a new HBCU visiting student and faculty exchange program. And with that, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to speak. I look forward to meeting many of you in person, and please feel free to reach out if there are any questions, and of course, follow us on Twitter as well. Thank you.
All right. So my intention here for our time together, very briefly, I'll share with you a little bit in terms of my path. I've been 20 months in the role of establishing an inaugural office of diversity, equity, inclusion as the vice dean at medical school in Minnesota, and then sort of really shift gear into some advice that I would sort of offer you all to sort of consider as you're evaluating sort of your opportunities and moving forward. So the University of Minnesota's medical school, that's the picture of the state, since we're all geography mavens. We have two medical school campuses, one in the Twin Cities area, one in Duluth. We are privileged that we have 11 tribal communities in Minnesota, which really sort of adds to our diversity. We also are the largest place in terms of a Somali diaspora, an Ethiopian diaspora, and second in terms of sort of Hmong. So we really have sort of quite a lot of really wonderful sort of diversity in terms of our population, as well as amazing work, both in health disparities, community engagement, and other areas. So as I said, I came from Philadelphia, and I've been here 20 months. In 20 months, we actually went from only having two individuals that had sort of roles within their departments about diversity, equity, inclusion. We now have 29, as well as 29 diversity, equity, inclusion committee members, committees that are set to establish what are annual faculty performance expectations for everyone to do in terms of contributing to the mission of diversity, equity, inclusion. We've engaged our leadership, both our service line and our department heads / chairs, in terms of intercultural development inventories to really begin the levers of change. And we have about an additional 15 or so affinity groups that are working, from our staff members to our postdocs, everybody. As Dr. Thomas mentioned, you really have to integrate into mission. Really do so. And so in our office, we've helped investigators address expectations from the NIH about how they should address issues about diversity, equity, inclusion. We've established, in terms of continuous across sort of training about DEI threads for our undergraduate and sort of GME space. And we've had some successes in terms of our own Mary Owen as the AAMC Exemplary Leader Award, as well as sort of a number of things that we involve. So it's been sort of pretty busy in terms of all aspects of mission. We're connected with our HOPE Commission. That's the entity that's helping structural transformation in our joint clinical enterprise, and certainly align with sort of the university as well as needs for our state in terms of outreach to COVID, in terms of diverse communities, to be able to help them sort of through this process. So this is sort of just a snapshot. Been pretty busy over the past sort of 20 months in terms of getting things sort of moving, and really some amazing and wonderful things. Our Center for Women in Medicine and Science was recognized by the NIH and given a gender prize. So there really are some exemplars, and really making structural transformation. That is in terms of at the role of sort of a vice dean, in terms of the scope of about 10,000 people plus, students, trainees, faculty, professional staff, et cetera. It's big space to cover, and big space to sort of create sort of the infrastructure to sort of move things, and couldn't have happened unless you really had sort of leadership from above and engagement throughout. So important to have an understanding of sort of that landscape to be able to be successful. I will tell you that there's a phrase that Minnesotans are nice and kind. And if you meet a kind and nice Minnesotan, you will not meet a better person. Very cool people. And the spring and the summer and fall are lovely. And if you like winter sports, this is the perfect place. Because we have that too. So it is a very vibrant place to live, and certainly all eyes on us in terms of issues about sort of anti-racism. Towards that, our CTSI is doing a pilot about anti-racism and research education for our scholars. And there's a number of sort of initiatives from our life science underrepresented students, research programs, our BA, MDs, our pre-med post-bacs, and a number of other programs that we have sort of throughout our system to both promote the pipeline as well as attend to issues about inclusion and sort of faculty life. But I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to talk to you more in terms of just cultivating of your scholarship and leadership skills, how to navigate in academic medicine, about issues about acculturation and agency, and being in trauma-imbued spaces in a role, so far as DEI, perceived to be sort of as a change agent. So sometimes the easiest questions, it's easiest sounding, are the hardest ones, right? Who are you? What are you known for? How are you going to cultivate your scholarship? Nobody lives within sort of an academic health center because they went there for advanced degrees in DEI, bluntly speaking. You go there in terms of excellence, in terms of teaching and education, care in terms of clinical outcomes, discovery in terms of research, to be able to help so far as medicine, science, and improve the health of the population. That's why we're here. So the question is, how do you support mission? How have you cultivated yourself, your scholarship, your niche to be able to be the go-to person in terms of that area, bringing with you that lens of diversity, equity, inclusion that is so needed to be integrated in every aspect of mission? So developing your crafts, your skills, your profiles as an expert, finding and growing your community in terms of building, how do you build your support, like coming to this meeting, like going to the GDI meeting in DC in a few days, as well as within your specialty. How do you build that community? Doing this work is hard work. You are not going to be obtunded in the Barca Lounger and have it happen automatically. If it was easy, anybody would do it. It isn't easy. It is hard work and often outside your day job. You have to sort of give that extra to get sort of the yield in terms of moving it forward. And I know that there are people who say like, well, I only have this 15 minutes to do it and don't ask me for any other time. And again, it's in a COVID weird world, so we can talk about that. But in general, people who have cultivated their career historically in terms of medicine, that's what weekends were made for. That's what evenings are made for in terms of getting there so far as moving forward. That is sort of the expectation in terms of you sort of developing yourself. In terms of sort of navigating medicine and coming up, important to balance issues about service, because there are endless needs in an academic health center. It is a vast sucking sound of gimme, 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 right? Balancing with the needs of I would like to do all these things for all people. So sometimes your own best and worst enemy, as well as sort of paying attention in terms of how does this count as I progress, not just punching Chad. So you can say, there you are, I'm an alpha professor, great. But really in terms of what are you giving away for free? What can you create as a twofer to be able to sort of help in your promotion? How do you balance your passion, the fire in your belly with the pragmatism of how far can we go today? What do we need to do here? And is there a voice that you need to sort of bring to the table to balance that yin yang for you? Growing your awareness of an organization, certainly as a level of one of the 4 vice deans at the medical school, it's my responsibility to know about all aspects of mission, which are lots of details. I don't do wet lab bench stuff, but I need to know about that and their life and the challenges for me to be sort of helpful so that they can sort of go from good to great or even more excellent than they are, addressing issues about who's on the team, equity, and sort of inclusion. So you have to learn things that maybe, weren't on your day job, you didn't hear about, to understand about the organization. When you get invited in terms of a DEI med school dean's position, you have to ask yourself, what is exactly the job, right? For some people, it's, hey, LCME's coming, tag you're it, become the DEI person and save our but to say nice things and sweet nothings to sort of LC me when they come. It may be that there's a need for you in terms of being leadership in your department. And this is a way to sort of promote in terms of that leadership and understanding what's the scope, what's the expectation, what's the accountability, and what's the resources to get the job done is really important. Dr. Velez may not have mentioned in terms of just her general awesomeness, in terms of writing a recent article that basically said, buyer beware, make sure you get what you want. I don't do it justice in the haiku, you should read the article. But essentially, when you're sort of invited to this position, do your homework, do your due diligence, check with other people of, does this make sense? Is it really a good position for me, for the development of my career, to become that sort of niche expert in my area, as well as sort of contribute to this in terms of accountability. There are jobs out there that are window dressings, and there are jobs that really have sort of support and resources and accountability. At our organization, we have an ECRA Scholar program that comes out of my office. That's about $14 million to be able to support new faculty who are talented sort of budding researchers in terms of joining the organization and giving wraparound mentorship and development sort of through their process. That's sort of meaningful sort of support in terms of sort of doing the work. It's important to recognize sort of what do you want and what are you getting out of that. Understanding sort of how things are written in paper that work, and then sort of there's hidden curriculum and there's hidden organizations of how things happen, how things move, who does, who doesn't. And that's really important in terms of doing a little espionage within your own place of knowing that. What values are attached without actual metrics and outcomes versus nice things that are said. Lots of sweet things are whispered, we aspire to, and lots of people give aspiration rather than actual action in a replacement thing. So you need to find out sort of, will people be held accountable in terms of contributing to DEI, everyone, so there aren't minority taxes and gender taxes? Or is this just something we say, but there really isn't accountability from that? The other piece in terms of making it through is being relentless, being like the little ever-ready bunny in terms of moving and moving and moving. So far as acculturation and agency, if you're not okay, it's not okay. You have to sort of attend to, and certainly COVID has tested all of us in terms of being okay. So if anybody is okay, you kind of do a reality check on that person, because I bet they're not. But we really have to sort of double down in this work. It is taxing work. The challenge that comes to us are not sort of easy peasy. So self-care and replenishing your true north in terms of therapy, spirituality, community, getting out in nature, connecting sort of with friends and family in a meaningful way, reading a silly book, doing yoga, whatever that works for you, that is actually as integral as anything else in terms of you being okay moving forward. When we learn to swim within sort of medical culture, some of it makes sense and sort of is familiar to us, but based on our personal identities, some of it sort of is foreign. And so as we assimilate, we have to sort of say, how do we swim through these waters in terms of, is it surviving? Is it selling out? Is it losing self? Is it being able to sort of find that balance of I can be me, but I can also sort of traverse in the space to be able to have structural transformation? So making, finding, and engaging in supporting space, supportive space is important. We have, in terms of our school, for example, a BIPOC faculty scholar group, one sort of for American Indians in medicine and science, as well as sort of a number of other groups, just for sense of community, that they can sort of connect in terms of WhatsApp and sort of say how they're feeling in terms of that supportive space. And when you have these opportunities, you have to decide, do I play or do I pass? When do I sort of move into something, and when do we sort of let this be in terms of sort of how it fits within the whole system? When I say being in trauma-imbued spaces as a change agent, the reality of it is that American sort of health systems are trauma-imbued spaces. They are not trauma-informed. A few people are writing about it and sort of, they're working on it and so on and so forth. My buddy, Sandy Bloom, has actually written about 5 books, the last being about sort of toxic sort of organizations. We have work to do to become a learning system, to be a space where it is trauma-imbued. We're not there yet. And so how do we bring our voice and our presence, live in these spaces as a change agent, and be okay? So where we start is actually our common mission. Why are we here? What we want to get done in terms of it being meaningful, and using this in a way of join. learning and reading more about sort of what is trauma informed and what are steps, small, medium, and large, that you can do with people, by systems, in terms of moving through it. And then deploying kindness and compassion and grace, even whenever you're kind of fried and roasty toasty, in terms of moving this forwards, because you're in it for the long term. And lastly, having a thick skin. You got to let stuff bounce. The ducks out here are called loons, right? And so ducks don't drown when it rains because water goes off their back because the oil. So you kind of have to be like a loon. And when stuff happens, know when to let it go off your back so you can be okay. So my take homes are, what all is here? If you're being presented with this opportunity, or you have this opportunity, what is the scope? What is the reach? What is the accountability? What impact, what success in a year look like for you? Where are you on your journey? Because it should not be, per what Dr. Velez wrote about, it shouldn't be an either or. Do I move forward in my career or do this role? Nope. It has to be sort of a both. In terms of sort of moving that forward. And perhaps it's sort of the, thank you so much, I'm really honored for this position, but maybe not now, but later, because I have other stuff to do. Who all is on your mentorship team? Sort of your takes a village mentorship team in terms of sort of helping you. In 10 years, what do you want to say you've accomplished? What's your impact? What losses, because anything gained comes with losses. What losses are acceptable and what aren't? And how do you replenish your stamina, courage, and passion? So in terms of sort of taking these things on, hopefully these are some useful things to consider as you craft forward, and certainly happy to share with you more information about sort of the wonderful things we're doing at the University of Minnesota's Medical School, and really sort of delighted and thrilled to be able to see you very soon.
Thank you both. Those talks were both aspirational and inspirational. We have a couple of great questions here in the chat. The first one I'm going to ask, however, is let's pretend. Let's pretend you are walking into a new university that you know little about. You've been asked to be the DE&I dean, and you are trying to set your agenda and realize, where is this institution in terms of DE&I? How do you go about assessing an institution for their preparedness on each of those levels?
Well, I'll jump in if that's okay, because that's what I did 20 months ago. I'm a native Pennsylvanian and sort of grew up and spent most of my time, all of my time in Pennsylvania, and sort of most of my professional time in Philadelphia, and looked in terms of a different opportunity. I was in a private medical school, and the opportunity at the University of Minnesota came up. So it's a different type of school. It's a land grant state university. So it's kind of different than a private. And I had to do that very thing. I had to do some fact finding of sort of like, what's here, who's here, is it ready? Because again, in terms of being the collaborator in chief, being a person to be able to leverage a lot of those resources, there needed to be stuff here. One person cannot shift a whole institution. You're not that big, you're not that important, you're not that impressive. It doesn't work that way. It really has to be a cultural transformation of an us and a we. So that means you have to learn who are the people who are the doers here, who are identified, and what are the resources in terms of accountability that matters. Quite frankly, in terms of in the final stretch, I sort of jokingly said, you know, my dad was a draftsman. And so I know people in interior design and they're lovely people, but I didn't grow up because I wanted to do window dressings. So if this is a window dressing job, I'm not in. But if this is real structural transformation, let's talk. And, you know, I was okay enough that, like, if it wasn't, we'd say, you know, thank you for the nice experience, and we call it a day. But you have to sort of talk to individuals, email folks, do some literature search in terms of if they say, look, we have this amazing stuff that we're doing in community engagement in our CTSI, look at the literature. Look at sort of what some of those projects are. Sort of do the homework, use other networks. I use networks in ELAM as well as colleagues in terms of the AAMC. And so I use a lot of networks of, hey, like, come, you know, I have a question for you. Let me, you know, like, can you give me the 411 here about sort of what's going on? You need to use lots of different resources to find out sort of whether it's sort of the real deal or not in terms of sort of accountability to move it forward. It is from a perspective, honestly, of immersion. 20 months in a new place, just the acronyms alone is sort of a challenging thing. But I will say that Zoom has enabled sort of me meeting about 1,400 people, which I probably wouldn't have done in real life, because access to Zoom isn't like walking from one building to another over a massively huge campus. But it is, you have to be okay with not knowing, and you have to be ready to kind of ride that pony in terms of a very fast learning curve of people who, know where the skeletons are buried and develop relationships there, and can give you the 411 about sort of how to do that. It isn't necessarily sort of the easiest piece, but it does go back to what part of mission do you bring to that story, even in sort of this oversight role. But it's a lot of fact finding.
Fantastic.
And
Thank you.
maybe I'll add to that, in that even though I wasn't entering a new institution, I was entering the role as an associate dean, which was wholly different than kind of the focus of my prior 7 years on faculty, focused in the clinic and on clinical research. But I approached it in a very similar way, interestingly. As I would approach, for example, a grant, scientific grant writing and or budget forming. I really focused on what are my aims, what are my deliverables, what am I hoping to accomplish, and set a very clear budget and asks and needs to accomplish the goals that I hope to set out. So, and in doing so, and having those really important discussions at the outset prior to beginning the role, there was a very clear set of expectations for myself in the role, a very clear job description that delineated what my role and responsibilities would be, and also a very clear delineation of the resources, importantly, that I would have to be able to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. So it actually it ties in very directly to the question that Monica had put into the chat around building of resources. Absolutely, our office is not solely funded by the HRSA grant at all. The HRSA grant definitely is a critical component of our office's budget, and requires actually what's called cost sharing, which is really support by the home institution to augment or complement the grant support as well. And so in doing so, our office is really our funding spans the hospital system, because of course, a portion of our constituency are actually the residents and fellows, house staff, and residents and fellows are employees of the hospital. So, and of course, our dean's office, which supports the education programs for our medical students. And then actually touching on the point that Anna, you had mentioned around LCME, I think that's really important too, using, it's really focusing on what matters to our institution. Stanford is a heavily academically focused research institution, leveraging that focus to incorporate aspects of our core mission as an office was really critical, really important. We want to cultivate physician leaders who are academicians. And by doing so, we need to focus on curricula, programs, and support to advance their leadership and scholarship in these areas. And again, that all requires resources. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was very much that this should not be only service or free time, and because ultimately, if it is, then you won't reap the same rewards and you won't accomplish the same level of commitment as you would for a faculty member who has a specific job description, a title, and resources to accomplish the goals that you're hoping to set out for them as a leader of a program, for example. And that has been universally the approach that I've taken with all of our programs. We are very clear in establishing what the role is and what support, staffing support, FTE support, and then also, what the expectations are for each of the faculty leaders too.
Wonderful. Thank you for answering that. It is something I've always said. It is wonderful for an institution when they fail LCME standards for diversity, because it means that it's an opportunity for the university to say, oh my gosh, we failed. We need to do better. Let's pour resources into this and hire people to come in and really run this ship into the right direction. However, aside from LCME standards being one benchmark, what other benchmarks do we hope to achieve to demonstrate that an institution is minority friendly, mission driven in terms of equity, and has the kind of climate that you would want your own child you would want to make your own child join that institution?
Great question. I mean, certainly I'll mention that, I sort of said, if you get this job just for LCME, maybe you should say no, but maybe not, depending on sort of like, if you say no and you're going to give me resources when we don't pass, then it could be in a similar fashion as Rena mentioned, soft money might be the way to open the door for this position, but there also should be hard money because sustainable change requires sort of that. But the things that you're sort of hitting upon, Monica, is really about sort of that inclusive piece. There are expectations in terms of ACGME, and certainly some of the wonderful work Francis Liu has been doing in terms of addressing sort of more profoundly sort of DEI. There's been some elements in terms of the action points from the AAMC talking about what do we mean by anti-racist and inclusive environments and sort of adhering to that. We do have certainly community needs assessments that all hospital systems have to go through to sort of say how friendly are we to sort of our communities. In state spaces like mine, the regents and the people in the state capitol care very much about how we're addressing issues in terms of diverse communities. So there are metrics and expectations in addition to Blue Ridge scores in terms of research innovations that we pay attention to, but important in terms of the day-to-day. To your point, there are standards in terms of saying, is this an inclusive space? I would share with you that because there are so many microclimes in medicine, that's where we need the engagement of the individuals. In neuro clinic, in endocrine clinic, in oncology clinic, in primary care, in this person's neuroscience lab, what does it look like here? And empower people to set those expectations, meet them, and get lauded when they do, or held accountable when they don't. And I think that's how we sort of, culture is a learned experience. And culture is something we co-create. So getting the people who are creating it to sort of say, baseline, here's core citizenship, and then more, and then exemplars. I think that's the way we make it be a place where, your child sort of comes in and has a wonderful experience. Your new faculty comes in and says, this is really cool. I'm here. But we have a lot of work to do in terms of before we get there.
Thank you.
And I will say I have to admire the passion, the vocal, support in favor of advancing health equity that our students, our residents, and fellows bring to the table. And their voice matters, and their voice has propelled a lot of the work that we do.
Absolutely. And I think setting a stage where you hear from them constantly is super important. Fantastic. So I want to acknowledge that the first person in my life that acknowledged that DE&I was a trauma-imbued space, and that as DE&I officers, we are often targeted by that trauma, and we are often carrying the trauma of others, was actually Dr. Nunez. And when she said it, it was like my vision became clear, and I realized why I was feeling the way I was feeling, and that I had not addressed my own experiences in the last 20 years, coming out and having all four tires of my car slashed after making a DE&I statement. Those are the kind of things that we actually live with day by day, comments made in offhand remarks. And they're becoming more obvious to the public, right? So we've seen in Boston neo-Nazis marching against people like Cameron Jones. We're hearing, I just saw on Twitter that Fox News called out the top 25 medical schools for having instruction on cultural competence and anti-racist practices. And so I want to hear from you all. How do you fill your soul? How do you continue when you are facing this kind of barrage of sentiment?
I convert that to what drives me to do this work, to be honest. It is every time I see something, in the news that is just appalling to me and that my core, it motivates me to do more. I don't know, maybe it's a protective mechanism to look at it that way.
So I take the attitude that there are in the universe some amazing people, and there's poo-poo heads. And honestly, just being able to address that these people are there, but and so what, right? I think it's really important that because we get kind of pulled out in terms of what's our scope. Right. There's kind of mission creep when you do DEI. You should do this and the universe. And now, go to the Ukraine and fix that. Okay. I mean, so, and again, I say that in a glib way, but the reality of it is it's really important that we sort of pay attention is what's under my locus of control? What can I sort of do? And being a sentient creature who cares about these other things, how do I, sort of do a little bit of Teflon to not take everything in, not suck on the exhaust pipe and sort of take it all in and take me down? How do I let some of this sort of bounce off of me in terms of Kevlar or at least plexiglass that I see, but I don't let it in? And how much do I sort of just let go? Because sometimes you just have to look at kitten videos, little memes and stuff that make you laugh and silly things, right? Because everything is challenging and the winds may be in such a trajectory that it's like water dropping on the rock, eventually melting the rock. Okay, so we have to be incredibly sort of patient. So I think that balancing that in terms of what is under my control, what is not, and sort of, and not disregarding issues about safety if I'm not going to go down that street, right? Sort of being aware of your surroundings, but also surrounding yourself with like-minded people, as is here in this conference, that you can sort of do hey, am I crazy? Let me ask you about this. How are you sort of dealing with this? There are pressures I certainly face in my role that I have faculty that's saying, you should put a statement out about Tigray, and you should put a statement out about Ukrainians, and you should put a statement out about people who are freezing coming across the border. These are all terrible things. The question is, I'm not the priestess on the mount, right? like that's not really sort of my job. Should there be moral outrage in terms of man's inhumanity, man? And I kind of do actually mean man, by the way. But the question is, how do we sort of say this is sort of the values we portray or not, but not to every single event of the moment? Because quite frankly, if you're going to be reactive to every single terrible event in the moment, you won't have time to do your job, right? Forget mission. You're going to be too busy. So I think that sort of that locus of control, and then sort of doing that self-care thing of how do I just say no to the emails for an evening? Yeah. How do I just, play with the 10-month-old puppy? Those kind of things. Those are really sort of replenishing things that are required for this work, not just nice to do if you have time. So I think that's some of the ways to frame it.
Beautiful. Thank you. Any other additional questions?
I just wanted to make a comment because I so am relating to the things that both of you have said. And I think that when we get to a certain level of professionalism,
I'm going to invite you to come up and use the mic. Yes.
Yeah, I'm relating very much to what you said. And I think that when we get to a certain level of professionalism, we things impact us in a different way, and we are able to do that. We are able to let things roll off, be the loon, as you said. I think when I think back on my own experience, the fact that I got pregnant in high school is something I can stand up here now and say to everybody, I'm a full professor. I'm the president of my national specialty organization. I don't look like a doctor. I don't dress like a doctor. So what? But when I was a medical student, I was ashamed of the fact that I had a child in high school because everybody else didn't. Everybody else said that has to do with being a Puerto Rican girl from the South Bronx. You're so typical. Yes, you don't look like a doctor. Yes, you don't dress like a doctor. Yes, you don't act like a doctor. All of those things caused moral injury to me. They don't now, but they did then. And I think it's so easy for all of us to forget how injurious the things that I can say about myself now in front of this room and that are being recorded are okay with me, but were not okay with me when I was a little medical student. And they're not okay with my little medical students now. And they're not okay with the people I'm responsible to mentor. And I think that we need to keep that in mind, that these kids are being injured, they are being damaged, they are being traumatized, as you said, they are being hurt. And as we go forward and we work that through as more mature physicians and say to ourselves, so what are you going to do to me now? What can you do to me now? But they can do plenty to hurt those kids. And they do plenty to hurt those kids, and those kids fail and they drop out. And they quit medical school, and they are morally injured, and they suffer tremendous emotional damage. And I think that's something that I don't have the answers. I don't have all the answers, but that's something that I think that we as faculty need to take on, and we need to help them to understand how to work that through, because I can tell you it impacted me for years and years and years. That whole process of going from pet to threat, when everybody hated me when I became an associate professor. And then when I became a full professor, I was the bitch from hell after I was this cute little thing when I was an instructor, right? So, it's a process that I think we don't have the answers yet, but I think it's a process that we are responsible for investigating, and a process that we are responsible for assisting our junior faculty and our residents and our students through.
You're absolutely right. Mm-hmm.
Super well said. Super well said. I think the trauma is real. Certainly those of us with a little gray hair live through a space where, the customer is always right. And now we're talking about patient-generated discrimination and trauma and how we have to sort of mitigate that. Certainly at our school, sort of doing training sessions for our medical students before they hit the floors about how do you handle as you go from system to system. Not that we want to sort of say it's okay, but we want them to be okay in terms of moving through it, in terms of sort of addressing this, because these things are real. About a month ago, I did a grand rounds for one of our affiliates in the emergency medicine department, and this very nice African-American man said, I don't know if you've ever had this experience when you were in care, that, a patient was, treated you meanly. And I just laughed out loud. I'm like, well, let's see, because I'm Latina, because I'm female, intersectional, right. I said, well, let's see, how about the COPDer who threw his bedpan at me? Yeah, I know about this, a lot, right? And this is sort of a longstanding thing, and it's not okay, but how do you take care of you, knowing that sort of getting to the point where we actually have sort of the safeguards that we have, that everybody can be okay, is there, and having the support in terms of moving through this process. We are in a very, very different space in terms of our learners and their tolerance of basically what crap they're going to put up with or not, because we put up with a lot just to sort of, you can't rock the boat till you're in the boat. And their threshold is very different. We have to both counsel them through that process. The other piece that you hit upon that is incredibly important, which is sort of a nut that we have to crack, is we know that there's inequities. We talk about sociocultural differences in terms of, having the opportunity to have sort of a child and go through medical school, right? That's a different opportunity that other people didn't have, right? And yet we have this almost fantasy of like, let's get really interesting sort of people who've had all of these sort of life experiences, put them in the pot in medical school, and then treat them all the same. Right? Because if we give them anything, well, then that's special needs, or we're treating them like favorites, right? Equity is different than equal. Everybody doesn't get a lollipop because people are different. And yet there is this reticence to address equitable interventions for support, for extra sort of racial caucus groups, for all these other things, because there's resistance because it threatens the status quo. And I think we have to sort of have people have the moral courage to sort of say, we're doing equitable things to address some of these things so people can sort of fly in terms of being successful on the other end. But really, really well said in terms of your comments. Thank you.
Beautifully said. And this is just the beauty of having diversity in life experiences and so much wealth in this community and being able to share it all. I want to thank you, Dr. Thomas and Dr. Nunez, for coming together and giving so generously of your wisdom and how you've transformed institutions. We look to you often, and we thank you so much for being with us today. Looking forward to seeing you in person tomorrow.
For sure.
Thank you for the opportunity. Looking forward to seeing you.
Yeah, great.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Take care.